Some young girls hear of a beautiful prince in the thriving town of Oxenfurt. He was the victim of a curse. The prince was turned into a toad, and they hear that if a girl was to find the toad prince and provide him a kiss, he would turn back into the handsome prince, and they would live happily ever after. These two girls go to look in the Oxenfurt sewers to find the Toad Prince. The only thing they find is a monstrous behemoth that may vaguely be called a toad, and a slow, horrifying death, leaving their families to mourn a disfigured and unrecognizable corpse, a memory of their former beauty. The world of The Witcher takes the brutal, very human world of Game of Thrones, where every action has a consequence, and combines it with the conceptual high fantasy and wondrous world of Lord of the Rings, low fantasy and high fantasy. Take our hero, for instance, a knight of the peacekeeping group of the Order of the Flaming Rose, Siegfried of Denise. He swore to protect the downtrodden and slay beasts for the sole purpose that he enjoys helping the innocent. He finds quick friends with mutant monster hunter Geralt, who slays monsters but never for free, and due to his horrific mutations, he is indifferent to most conflicts and doesn't care for most people, unlike Siegfried, who will forever protect the innocent for the greater good. Unless you have never heard of this franchise before, then you can probably tell that what I just said was a lie. Sort of. It's all true, except that Siegfried is not our hero. He is in The Witcher 1, and depending on your choices, he can show up in the second game too. But he is not our hero. He is a misguided side character whose black and white worldview blinds him to the corruption of religious zealots in his order.
You've got yourself into a fine pickle, Geralt.
Our hero, if you can call him that, is Geralt.
You know me?
The mutant monster slayer. Geralt is a witcher. Most witches will stay out of conflicts and only slay monsters for gold. But the books and games especially create this low fantasy side by having Geralt be given 3 options. In The Witcher 1, Geralt can choose to side with the Scoia'tael or the Order of the Flaming Rose. The Scoia'tael may be the obvious choice as they're rebels fighting for their freedom, but they're also well known for incredibly hostile and savage military operations. Even their whole fight for freedom is a selfish quest for more land, even though they already have plenty. The Order of the Flaming Rose supposedly fight for the innocent and downtrodden, but also partake in racist and bigoted witch hunts, literally and figuratively. You can also choose to go neutral, but if you choose not to take a side, you must fight both, and cause more direct death and destruction than if Geralt had simply picked a side. It's a decent way of showcasing the low fantasy side of this world, but it doesn't leave out the mages, sorceresses, and curses that flow through this land and have real stakes in all of these conflicts. Having a mix of low fantasy and high fantasy is not a new idea. Perhaps back in '93, but I doubt it. Some might say that Game of Thrones has this mix. It has dragons and sort of magic, but one, it still barely leans on these fantasy concepts, and for the most part, it primarily sits in the realistic medieval story, more fascinated with politics than dragons. And 2, Game of Thrones creates a distinct separation between the fantasy and realistic medieval concepts. The world of The Witcher uses the high fantasy concepts to frame the depressing low fantasy elements. Humans don't just poke fun at dwarves and elves like in Lord of the Rings. They invaded a land they didn't belong and performed and continue to perform a genocidal, quote, purification, and claim these lands as their own. In the first collection of short stories, the book The Last Wish, a princess isn't trapped in a castle by a monster, she was transformed into a vicious monster, a striga by a jealous noble who accidentally invoked a powerful curse because he hated the princess's father. The Witcher blurs the distinction to provide context to the elements it contains. It uses the framing of fairy tales to put the often quite despicable state of the human condition on display. We can observe the magic and the wonder and think to ourselves, it's okay because it's so separate to our own lives. But The Witcher uses these ideas and shows us that even in a land of wonder and mysticism, it doesn't matter the context. Our actions have consequences, and as a people, we are still very capable of extreme good and chivalry, but also very prone to the deepest and most vile evils imaginable.